Welcome to the South End Zone of Kyle Field. Will Johnson, Matt Simon with you. Special edition of Studio 12 coming your way. Earlier this week, the announcement was made that Dave South, the voice of the Aggies for over 3 decades, would decide to retire from football and basketball play calling duties. So who better to have in our studio today than the voice, the man, Dave South.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the decision, but I guess, Dave, there's some bittersweetness to it, I would think, too.
Oh, maybe a little bit, but I'm ready for this. I'd have no second thoughts about it, and obviously coming from my namesake, which is the South End Zone at Kyle Field, which is pretty neat to sit here in my end zone, which will forever
we thought
be
of a name for this place. We thought of you.
It will always be the South End Zone, and I'm flattered by that A&M would think enough of me to do that. So, anyway. Leanne and I started talking about this really about 3 years ago. And going into the 30th year, we sort of toyed with the idea that might be it. Then we decided, well, let's let this play out a little bit. And so that's we came back for 31. And then coming into 32, last August, I had a meeting. Leanne and I had visited. I had a meeting with John Heitke of Learfield and Andrew Wheeler. And I said, probably going into number 32, that's going to be it. Mm-hmm. So I notified them at the 1st of June that this coming year would be my last in football and basketball. They granted that I could go on and do baseball. And I guess maybe I've kind of hedged a little bit over the years. Somebody will ask me what my favorite sport is, and I'll say the one in session or the one in season. And I said, but you know what? Baseball has always been my favorite sport. Mm-hmm. I absolutely love the game. I've played the game since I was 7 years old. I've umpired for 14 years, and big Aggie baseball fan, and then past that I'm a big Dodger baseball fan. And how that came about, I have no idea, because I didn't live in anywhere near Brooklyn, which I picked the Dodgers up in 1955, which was a good year to pick them up because that's the only time that Brooklyn won a World Series. So I picked the right year. And
good timing.
I think you're going to be good this year, too.
Yeah,
for the
it looks
record.
like
you're in pretty good shape.
I'm not sure right now because they did lose last night, and then hope they haven't peaked too early. But anyway, after a lot of prayer went into this and made that decision, and I'm comfortable with it. I am at peace with it. And I'm looking forward to this last year. I want Coach Sumlin and Coach Kennedy to have good seasons. I want to go out with good years because I came in on a great year back in 1985 with Jackie Sherrill. And Jackie's the reason that I'm here. He and Ralph Carpenter extended the invitation to me in 85 to take this job. And I told him at the time I'll do it for 1 year. And you got to find somebody to take my place prior to 1986 because I had retired from the play-by-play part of my life because I'd moved into management, into sales management, and eventually as a general manager. So 1985 went by, and so now all of a sudden it's 2017, and 32 years later,
we go.
That 1985's turned into a long year. But I came in at the right time because Jackie, we won the Southwest Conference in 85, 86, and 87, went to 3 bowl games in a row. Playing Auburn, and then I guess we took on, I'm not sure who we played that second. Might have been Ohio
State, yeah.
And then came back in 87 and won that because we beat Notre Dame. And Tim Brown and the infamous 12th-man towel.
The towel snatch.
The towel deal, and our 12th man grabbing that towel and running off with it. And so anyway, I'm comfortable and I'm happy and I'm looking forward to the future. I know God's got some great things planned for me and what he's going to do. And I've got a bucket list of things that I want to do. A couple of them are kind of personal, but one of them I want to do. I just finished a book by George W., 43, our president, and it's called Decision Points. And I'd forgotten until I read that book how much he went through in his presidency.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was just one thing after another. I don't know how he came out of there a sane man to me, obviously, but I think he was a good president. But I want to, on my bucket list, I want to go sit on the back porch at the ranch in Crawford and drink coffee with him. No, I really do. I've met him before. We went to a fundraiser when he was running for governor. We supported him. And I met him then, and I've talked to him on the phone when he was with the Texas Rangers. I called in one time I rarely ever call in on a radio show, but I called in and talked to him then. But I just want to sit on the back porch. I don't want to talk politics. I want to talk about life. And I want to have a cup of coffee with him and look out over the ranch there in Crawford. And the other thing on my bucket list is a few years back, maybe 4 or 5, I had a chance to sit down and interview Lyle Lovett. And after we got through with the interview, we talked for about another 20 minutes or so. And I was so impressed with him. I mean, I want to go back and extend that conversation. I want to sit on his back porch and drink coffee with him, and that's a deal on the bucket list. But I want to go.
That could turn into a music session.
Yeah, it could. But he was just one of the nicest people that I've met a lot of nice people, and I want to sit down and visit with him. So there's 2 items on the bucket list. We've had arrangements have been made for me that when I do go, they're going to give me a VIP tour of Cooperstown. And so Leanne and I will make a trip up there. Leanne's never been to Washington, D.C., and she's a history major, as I was. And I want to take her up there and take her to the Smithsonian and just let her see everything in D.C. And we've made arrangements there as well. Somebody's going to give us a VIP tour. May even go to the White House. We'll see. But we're looking forward to that. And before any of that's done, I'm probably going to have to do this first thing. It's going to have to be top of the list. I want to we went to the Grand Canyon last year. The first time I'd ever seen the Grand Canyon. I want to go back to the Grand Canyon. I want to hike to the bottom. I want to spend the night down there, and then I want to hike back to the top. And so that's some things on my bucket list. And those be some things we'll try to accomplish as soon as possible.
He's going to stay busy.
Yeah.
You'll still be busy.
I want to volunteer. My wife and I support the Humane Shelter here in town, and I'm going to volunteer. Debbie Dara, who works in sports
media
news.
relations,
Debbie, you have to pay to do this. You have to pay a little fee, and then you go out and train for it. But I want to be a dog walker.
Okay.
I want to go out and walk dogs at the Humane Shelter because we've rescued dogs and we've rescued cats, and so I want to do that. I want to get more active with my Lions Club, and then there's some things I want to do with my church, and so I'm going to stay busy. I don't think I'm not going to go home and sit in the easy chair and lean back and think about nothing. I'm going to stay active physically as long as I can. So all of that.
Well, and you had told me too, like there's so many things, and I guess everyone has busy jobs and they're doing all this stuff. But people may not realize it's more the travel commitments more than anything when you do this job that you're broadcasting from a certain time. There's prep obviously and going in, but you can't really do anything from probably August through, well, now including baseball, really August through June. You've got like a month, 6-week window to do stuff. So this will open up your fall and your winter to do a lot of things you've never been able to do before.
Yeah, and there's some places that we can go in the fall and in the winter that you can't go in the summer because it's just too hot. I want to go to the Big Bend, but going down there in the summer, that's not anything I want to do. But then I noticed the other day that Portland got up to 106, and that I don't know what happened there. So I hope that will probably happen to me. I have a big, gigantic heat wave start. But no, you're right. Time constraints of this. Fortunately for me, God blessed me with something that I love doing, and I've never taken for granted the talent that He gave me to do it. And I have never taken for granted that I ended up at Texas A&M for the last 32 years, because as you guys know, you're both A&M grads. It's a special place. I live the conservative values that Texas A&M has, and so I've just been blessed. And now there's some other things that I'm gonna have fun doing.
Well, you just answered it earlier when I was going to ask you, when you came here, did you see this maybe being your final stop in broadcasting? And you just told us no, it was just kind of a one-year thing at the start.
Well, and I wasn't going to do any more games after 85. I decided, okay, I'll come down, Coach Sherrill, and I will do these games, but find somebody else for 85, 86. And then Leanne's dad had gone to A&M. I used to come down here. I think maybe I've told you this before. I used to come down, and I would buy a ticket and sit in the stands when Shelby was coaching basketball here, because I love to watch his teams play. Because for sure a football game would break out. I love the way they played basketball. And so I had that experience with Texas A&M, and then the fact that her dad went to A&M and Leanne got her master's here. So it's been a blessing that I get to work here. And then we'll go on living in College Station. I think College Station is a great place to live, and we have a great church, and we have lots of friends. And I'm excited about what I've done, and I'm excited about what I'm going to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we kind of mentioned this the other day, Matt, is that Dave, you have called Aggie sports in all three of our conferences that we have been in.
Yeah.
And we could kind of go in order, and you could talk Southwest Conference first. Yeah. That's where you came in. Was there something about those games? I know once realignment started and people said you got to get these teams all in, but was there something just quaint and fun about that league that it was just all Texas teams going
about the Southwest Conference? Well, first of all, the travel was easy. You had the trip to Arkansas and you had the trip to Lubbock, and sometimes baseball would bust to those two places. And you'd play a lot of cards and read a lot of books on those trips. But, man, you went to Dallas, you went to Fort Worth, you went to Houston. There's two schools down there because we had Houston and Rice. You went over to Austin, you went to Waco, so it was right there, and the travel was good. You could start to see what was happening. Now, I don't mean this to bash anybody else, but for the most part, and I think Matt has written this in a story, and I've said this before, some of the schools were on the coattails of Texas A&M and Texas. I mean, that's what carried that league to some extent. Arkansas, but they were way off up there in the northwest corner of that state. And the Aggies and the Longhorns were carrying that league. And you could start to see some things creep in because while the Southwest Conference wasn't promoting itself as they should have, all along the Cowboys were gaining power. The Oilers were down in Houston. The Rangers were in Arlington. The Astros were in Houston, and the pro game started to creep into this state. And the Southwest Conference at one time it was the conference, and it led the state with the games that we played, and it started to lose some of its luster. And I think eventually it just sort of went away, and I could see how it would dissolve, and it did. And that's when we made the move to the Big 12, and eventually we make the move to the SEC. One of the things I'm proud of, and this won't be broken in my lifetime, this will not happen. I have seen more A&M athletic events than anybody in the history of the school, period. There's nobody that's seen as many games as I have, and they won't break that in my lifetime, so that won't happen. And the fact that I have worked for all three of the conferences, and I don't see us – there's a big logo out here outside the window. I don't see us leaving the SEC. So I've worked for the Southwest, I've worked for the Big 12, and now the SEC. I've done the games. And then I'm the last living and I don't know living, but I'm the last working announcer out of the old Exxon Southwest Conference Network. It was a different league. They put the emphasis on football, and I was always amused because if you called football, they let you call basketball as an official. They did. And some of those guys had no business. You'd see them look, they were reaching in their pocket, were looking for the flag. Oh, they don't drop a flag in basketball. And so, but that was pretty amusing right there in that, that it wasn't good officiating in basketball, that period. They were nice guys. They were all good guys, but they had no business calling it. But they did. And then the facilities at that point in time, I think probably as I think back on it, I think TCU probably had the best facility in Daniel Meyer Coliseum. Mm-hmm. And when they built Daniel Meyer, they built it for $1 million. And it was pretty old by the time I got into the league. They decided that one of the things they could do to update it was to put in all new seating. The new seats they were going to put in were going to cost more than the original facility. It was.
Business has changed.
A whole lot. And so the facilities were different. I mean, we played out in Lubbock at the Lubbock Municipal Coliseum, and that was that was special. And so, I mean, they when the lights would go out and they'd dim the lights for the player introductions, you'd hear this plop, plop, plop. And the lights would go back on, and some of the students would throw turkey eggs out there on the floor, and they'd have to spend time then cleaning that up. Down at Houston, some of the fans down there would bring pliers to the game in their pocket and a cigarette lighter. And they would take a penny and hold it in the pliers and heat it up and then throw it out onto the floor, and an official would come over to pick it up. And obviously it was burning hot, so they would do some of that. You'd see some of that stuff. Well, that's how it goes. And then I've seen I've seen some of the Houston fans throw golf balls out onto the field at halftime when our band was marching. They would do that, hoping they would step on it. So that was life in the Southwest Conference.
Yeah.
And Dave and I, it wasn't so much Dave back. Dave didn't join me until I guess 88, 89 in that period. But we have in the Southwest Conference days, we have worked in some facilities that you wouldn't believe. I know at one time when SMU came back, I guess that was in the Southwest Conference.
Late 80s, yeah.
And Dave and I had to turn sideways in the booth because we couldn't both stand and face the front of the booth. It was that tight. And Ed Haddon, who was our engineer, had set up out in the hallway and had to string wires in there for these headsets. So we had that. One year at Texas Tech, the booth we had, the door was a gigantic tarp that looked like a shower curtain. And that was a dismal place. But now Texas Tech built the new press box, and before we built ours, it was the nicest press box in the league. So that was kind of life in the Southwest Conference. And I had I still have some relationships with a lot of the people that I used to work with in that league. And the other thing too, back in those days, guys, is that you had some really good writers, and it wasn't, we talk about trying to scoop somebody. That didn't happen back in those days. You could really, if a writer said it's off the record, it was off the record. And there's still some today that are off the record, and I appreciate that very much. I work with two guys that I trust to the end of the earth, and that's Brent Zorneman and Rich Kroom. I think if I ask them, this is between you and me, that's where it stays. And then we moved on to the Big 12, and I can tell you right now, that the four schools that moved up there, that it was obvious that there were 7 schools in the Big 12 that did not want us. They didn't want us up there. There was one that wanted us, and that was Colorado, because they had been ostracized. The other 7 wanted nothing to do with Colorado. It was like, okay. And so Colorado, when we go to tournaments or whatever was going on, Colorado guys would come over and stay with us. And the other 7 schools, they just stay away from us. And so that was the atmosphere when we first moved. The Big 8, 7 of those Big 8 schools did not want Texas A&M, Texas Baylor, and Texas Tech. They didn't want that to happen, but it did. And it took a while before that became kind of a family where everybody started to get along. I can remember a guy coming in here was doing Nebraska baseball. I have no idea who he was, but he said, I said, how's it going for you? And he said, pretty good. And he said, obviously it's going good for you since you guys are running the league. And I went, what are you talking about? He said, well, Texas and Texas A&M are running this league, and everybody knows it. And I said, okay, when it comes to a vote, we have 2, and you guys, if you include Colorado, have 8. How are we running the league? And he said, I hadn't thought about that, but it was true.
Yeah.
And so it was hard the first 2 or 3 years. I can remember Homer Jacobs and I going out. We were in the basketball tournament at Kansas City.
Yeah.
They hosted a big hotel, was the Media Hotel. And we got eliminated the first game.
That was kind of a routine thing.
Yeah, it was.
Those early in the league, yeah.
We didn't make it to the second round, so baseball was playing over at Missouri. And so I just left the hotel, and I'd drive over and do the games in Columbia, and then I would drive back to the hotel since I already had the hotel. And so I got back to the hotel after that. It was a Saturday afternoon game, and it was Saturday evening by the time I got back up to the media. And Homer walked in with me, and there were 2 guys that were working up there. And when we walked in, I had an A&M jacket on, so did Homer. And this one guy goes, A&M, get out of here. Y'all lost. And so, okay. I said, hang on, we're going to get something to eat, and we're going to leave, because we were going to go back out and sit in the lobby and eat our box lunch out there. And so you guys, and then he made another comment, said something about, it wasn't dirty, but he just said something. I look around, and it kind of aggravated me, and I walk over there. And I remember saying something to them, and I said, who are you guys? And they wrote for it wasn't an official school newspaper. It was the one that did cover this particular school. And I said, what do y'all do? And they said, they named the publication. And I looked at Homer, and I said, what is that? And Homer said, well, it's kind of like, the 12th Man magazine. But he said it has nothing to do with the school. And I turned back around and I said, it must not pay well. And this guy said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're not dressed very nice. And he stood up at that point, and he said something else about Texas A&M. Well, Homer at first had been trying to, Dave, let's go. And then they said something about Texas A&M. I'll never forget. Homer started taking off his jacket. He was going after the guy.
Let's go.
And I had to hold Homer back. And so I'll never forget that. And there was no security people in there. There was a guy that worked at the hotel and come in to watch the games, and he picked his chair up and turned it around, and he's watching, this ought to be good. And so the other guy finally set him back down. But it wasn't pleasant. In the early days of the Big 12, they didn't want those 4 schools.
Yeah.
And it took 2 or 3 years before everybody started to warm up to each other. And after it happened, to this day, I've still got friends up there in the Big 12 that I'm close to and I like. But it didn't go over well. Now, that compared to what happened when we entered the SEC. Before we ever got there, I remember we went to Madison Square Garden to play basketball. The night before we played there, Kentucky and Duke had played a game. And we were staying like 2 blocks from Madison Square Garden. And Al and I had gone down to somebody else. We were eating at the table, and we had A&M stuff on. The Kentucky people had stayed over, and they were leaving that day to go back home. They came over to the table and surrounded the table and said, we can't tell you how happy we are to have you all in the SEC. Mm-hmm. Welcome. And that happened a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, it still goes on. The people, after 5 years, they're still going, well, we're glad you guys are here. We like Texas A&M. And so that was the welcome mat there compared to what we had experienced in the Big 12. It got better in the Big 12, and I still say to this day that the move that we made to the SEC, it was a great move, and it's a move that, it'll be I can't see us being anywhere else but this conference for as long as we're playing college athletics.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Dave South with us here. We're talking with Voice of the Aggies. If you missed the news, I don't know how you would have, but if you missed the news earlier in the week, Dave hanging it up at football and basketball after this coming season. He will continue to do baseball here for Texas A&M. I want to take you way back here, and I want to let you talk a little bit about your relationship with a man I know that meant a lot to you, and Frank Fallon.
Yeah.
The folks in this town that were around at the time when he was on, I caught just the back end of his career, right when he was finishing. The guy was a legend, maybe the one of, if not the most famous broadcasters in the state. Really a guy that mentored you as a young broadcaster. Talk a little bit about your relationship that you had with him and how he helped you kind of get to where you're at.
Let me say something. I don't think I mentioned this to you when we were talking about this, but, the relationship back in the 60s and 70s in the Southwest Conference, A&M and Baylor did not get along. They did not like
That's kind of continued.
Yeah, it has. And, it still is probably the same today as it was back then.
Well, that move to the SEC flared it up.
But even though Frank had that connection with Baylor, there was about a 3-year window there where they brought Frank down here to do the Gene Stallings show. And so Frank was the host of that show. Here's a guy that's really affiliated with Baylor University, but they wanted Frank to come down and do it. They had that much respect for him, and Frank was a great broadcaster, and he played it right down the middle. I know to the day he died, he would bleed green and gold. He would. But he was a great broadcaster. He had an opportunity. He did the Oilers back in the day. He was the voice of the Houston Oilers, first voice of the Houston Oilers. The Astros tried to make him a part of that broadcast team. They invited him, but he had such a love for Baylor that he wanted to stay there in Waco. But I've always said that the things I do right, it's because I listened to Frank. And the things I do wrong, I wasn't listening to Frank. And so Frank was just he was a great broadcaster. And, he ended up his last years as the voice of the Final Four. He did the PA at all the Final Fours. David Kaywood put him in that position. He came back one time and told me that he had a vest that they gave him. This is kind of how people are about that Final Four. But he had a vest sitting there that they gave him. He could keep it if he wanted to, but a guy came up when the championship game ended, and said, "I'll give you $200 for that vest." And Frank said, sold. And then somebody saw Frank sell the vest, and he came over and he said, did you keep score with that pen? And Frank said, yeah. Give you $100 for the pen. And so $300 right there just on memorabilia. But that was Frank's job. And I could just go on and on about how professional he was in his approach. And you would never I'm accused of being a homer, and I am. And I think there were some times when Frank probably was a homer, but not really. And he played it right down the middle. And everybody in the Southwest Conference, there wasn't a coach in football or basketball that didn't have a lot of respect for that man. I mean, the neat thing that Frank and I ended our relationship, he had retired, and he called at least once or twice a month, sometimes more than that. And I always appreciated something that he'd always finish up the conversation by always telling me, Dave, you know I love you. And that meant a lot to me coming from Frank. And so God bless me that he put me in that situation where I could learn from the best.
Mm-hmm. Certainly a true friendship and bond you guys created. One thing about your time at A&M is, football coaches all the way from Jackie Sherrill to Kevin Sumlin, basketball coaches all the way from Shelby Metcalf to now Billy Kennedy, baseball coaches from Mark Johnson to now Rob Childress, which they've been the only two. That's a longevity right there, but they've been the only two. But
consistency.
Because since you got to know all these men, you've done countless interviews with all these individuals. For the Aggie fan out there that's wondering about those men that you worked with, who were some of the true characters at this school that you found? Some you've built relationships with just about all of them.
The top of the list was Shelby.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no doubt about it that he's a picture of character, and I loved being around him. And some of the things that he would say publicly, I don't want to repeat here, even though he said them publicly. But he was funny, and I liked being around him. When, as I said earlier, we got to drive to a lot of the games, and so sometimes I wouldn't ride the team bus. I would take my own car. And if we won, he always would find me, and he'd go, I'm riding back with you. And he would put the assistant coaches on the bus. And so I knew what was going to happen, whether it was in Waco or wherever we were. He'd go, okay, find the convenience store. Okay. So I knew what he was going to do. He would go in, and he would buy a quart of milk and a package of Oreo cookies. And so go in there and get them and come back, and he would eat those Oreo cookies and drink that milk on the way back and then talk. We would talk, and he told Spins lots of stories. Never failed. We would get to his house, and I don't like Oreo cookies. And I would say, I did it one time. I had said, you don't forget your cookies. And he said, I can't take those in. My wife won't let me eat them. And he said, they're yours. And so I always ended up with a bag of Oreo cookies, and he'd finish the milk off, take them home. All right, we've got Oreos. And I'd bring them up here to the office and let you guys have them. But that's where those Oreos came from. But, I guess that was really the only true character that I worked with. I had great relationships. Tony Baroni was a character now that we shared a lot of trips together. I'll never forget, talked him in. I got a call from the Aggies in San Angelo, and they said, would you bring Coach Baroni out here? We'll fly you out and whatever. And we were going to have to fly a little charter one of those small airplanes. And Tony said, I'm not flying that. He said, if I go, you're going to drive me. And San Angelo is about a 7-hour drive. Yeah. And so we spent the night in Mason. And then coming back, we came straight back because he spoke at noon that day. And I kept telling him how I'd been to San Angelo before. Nice people, really nice people. There's a lot of good Aggies out there. And I kept saying, this is a great group. You're going to love it. They're just good people. So we walk in, and first rattle out of the box. I don't know who this guy was. He came over and he said, Coach, I got a question for you. And Tony looked at him and goes, yeah, what is it? And he said, how come all basketball coaches are short, fat Italians? And he looked at me, and I knew why he was looking at me. They're nice people, huh? He turned back around at that guy, and he looked at him, and he said, because we're good at answering stupid questions. And so now I could share some other stories with Tony. Tony, during the basketball season, Tony was a different person, and that's kind of true of all the coaches. But outside the basketball season, he and I would go down, and when the Cubs played in Houston, he'd invite me to go with him. He'd have tickets, and because he's a big Chicago Cub fan, we'd go down and watch the Astros play down there and the Cubs. And then he was over at my house during the summertime for meals as much as I was at his house for meals. And so we had a great relationship. But, Will, I think one of the things down through the years that I wanted to do is I wanted to assure any coach that I worked with that they could trust me. And whatever they said to me stayed with me. And it will for the rest of my life. I'll tell funny stories, but I would never give anybody in. I'm not going to breach anybody's trust. And I think that's the reason that I've had a longevity of 47 years and then 32 of that here at Texas A&M, because all of these coaches that I've ever worked with, I had one coach that, unnamed for a number of years back in the Southwest Conference days that had to go to his room to do an interview with him for the game the next day. And it wasn't A&M, but it was just a coach. And when he opened up the door, he'd been having a good time in the room with he was about the bottom of a fifth, I think, and I'm not talking baseball. And so he just started opening up to me about everything that was going on in the Southwest Conference, which all came true. Mm-hmm. I mean, the things that people were doing. And
those are the good old days. I wish I'd been around to experience some of that.
But the bottom line was, he just, everything he said eventually came to light when the NCAA investigations came out. But I will go to my grave and never tell you who it was or what he said, because I'm not going to do that. But I wanted every coach to know that you could trust me. And I've had a good relationship with every coach at Texas A&M down through the years. Mm-hmm. I never found the common denominator with Billy Gillispie. I've tried to, I wanted to let Billy know that I was his friend and I was going to support him. But we just never really able to. We just did not mesh, and I regret that because I wanted to be friends with Billy. Mm-hmm. But again, I think Billy knows he can trust me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dave South with us right here on this edition of Studio 12, special edition, and it's probably the perfect time to stroll down memory lane because there's calls of yours that Aggie fans are going to remember forever. I mean, the Big 12 championship game, obviously in 1998 with the football team, rings a bell. But for you, do you have – and it's kind of hard to pick in 32 years.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would ask you, do you have a moment
I do.
that you reflect? But you do have it.
Yeah,
that was quick.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
No,
I thought it would be harder.
No,
because I thought you had a lot of moments to sift through.
Forever. The bonfire game. I've said this before. Mm-hmm. I have said time and time again that when somebody goes, I've been praying for a win, and I've said I would be disappointed if God cares who wins that game. But I think that day that God cared. Mm-hmm. A&M was going through a tough time. We had lost 12 A&M students, young people. We needed to win that football game. Mm-hmm. And Brian Gamble down there in the center of that field holding up that football. Mm-hmm. It's one of the few times that I've been able to talk about that I'm not crying, because that happened. I started crying on the air, and I didn't have to force that. I mean, it just came because I can remember the beginning of that game when all you could hear were the flags above the stadium, the wind blowing those flags. And I don't know what I always thought it was dove that they released. I guess it was. I have no idea. You could hear those flags, and then you could hear the flapping of those wings of those birds just before the start of the game. And then I remember Texas Band and what they did, their halftime presentation. I think they played Amazing Grace. But that's a moment that will be etched in my mind until the day I die. That was just a special moment. And it really had nothing to do with, even though we won the ball game, it was just the way it ended and the fumble recovery and everything else that happened leading up to that week. That was a time that it was hard for all of us.
Switching to basketball, I've always wondered this. I believe you called in '87 when we were the 8th seed in the Southwest Conference tournament and won it. Yeah. But the Aggies don't make another tournament for close to 20 years.
Yeah.
What was that moment like for you? And let's maybe use AC Law as the shot, as the surreal, maybe the icer, but maybe personally for you when you saw that name pop up, or do you have on the screen for the bracket, or do you have a great basketball moment that kind of stands out at the top of your list?
Well, that Northern Iowa game, that was the greatest basketball game I've ever seen in my life, because on the air I was saying, congratulations, Northern Iowa. I hope you guys do well against Oklahoma next week out in California. Congratulations to Coach Kennedy and the team because they played well all year long. And we look forward to next year. And then I think John Thornton, Al couldn't make that game. John Thornton was working with me. And all of a sudden, under a minute to go, I'm going, John, something's happening here. And for everything, Kevin Stallings, the coach at Vanderbilt, went back apparently. I didn't hear this, but he went back after the game was all over with. And he had looked at that last minute. And he said, and I guess you could go back and check him on this, there were 11 things that had to happen. And he said if one of those 11 didn't happen, A&M doesn't win. Mm-hmm. And he said he went back and he picked out every moment, and it was 11 moments, 11 instances in that game that had happened, and we sent it into overtime, and we won the ball game. And I know that the next morning as we were driving back, my phone started lighting up because most people had gone to bed, turned it off. People started calling, what happened? Well, we won. You must have turned it off. I didn't know until I got up this morning. Admon Gilder's parents were driving back. They had left the arena. They had to work the next day, and so they were driving back. They were listening to it on the radio. And they called their son. We're sorry we left. We didn't see it. But that was that's an unbelievable game. And and it was the greatest comeback in the history of college basketball, according to what I was told. It was a game. The coaches I'm working with right now are Kevin Sumlin and Billy Kennedy and Rob Childress. And I love all three of those guys. I've never had a coach really that didn't treat me with respect. That I have no complaints about any of my coaches, and that made my job a lot easier. From Jackie Sherrill to Kevin Sumlin, and like you said, there's only two in baseball. So, yeah. and Mark Johnson and I, we still we get together every Thursday, and we drink coffee. That's a relationship I hope to have the rest of my life. And I've said before that Mark and I were born on the same day in the same year. So we celebrate a birthday every year together, and I need to get a call from him. I didn't know that. Yeah, he's 72 and 72.
Belated happy birthday, by the way.
Yeah. I will say this, that he does look older than I am because I understand he was born an hour earlier than I was. So anyway, all my coaches, even back to Kermit Davis. Kermit and I visited on the phone not too long ago, and it was an unfortunate situation with Kermit because I think Kermit was going to be a good coach. I really think he was going to do a good job. Melvin Watkins, a good man, and it just didn't work here, and I don't know why. And I'm glad he's gone on to have success. First of all at Missouri, and now at Arkansas, working up there. Melvin's a good guy, and I appreciate it, Melvin.
Mm-hmm. Well, one quick thing before we let you go. I was wondering, as you've called, because you called games for the Exxon Network at Kyle Field here when it was 2 decks. Then you saw it expand to 3. Yeah. Then you saw the north end zone. Now you're perched atop this thing over here over our shoulders, 103,000 or so fans. Pretty amazing how far things have come here at Texas A&M.
Oh, golly, yeah. I mean, the old original press box, boy. It was an old original press box, and I have done games out of that press box before they started, renovating and then changing things, and then they went to the press box that we have. It's interesting that I'll always remember when we imploded the West Side. We were on the road with basketball. We were somewhere, and if you go back and look at the video. When the elevator shaft fell, the middle elevator, there was 3 elevator shafts, as you recall. The middle one fell first. As it's going back, if you look, you could look at the 9th level the 8th level where we broadcast games. If you look at that and you pause it, the door to the broadcast booth was open, and you could see out the window. And so that was my last look out of a window that I stood in front of for years and years. But you can go back and you can see it, and then all of a sudden it's just gone. And so it was, that was a moment that I'm kind of sad that happened. I've collected a lot of memorabilia from A&M down through the years. I have a piece of the old north end zone. It was the step that had a number on it, and the guy chiseled that out for me. I've got a section of the wall of DeWare Fieldhouse that's part of my flower bed out in front. Matt, next time you're over, I'll show it to you. Billy Pickard gave me one of the old lights that came out of Kyle Field, and we've turned that into a planter box out in the back. I was given a part of the wall of G. Raleigh White. I've got a part of the floor of G. Raleigh White, and I've got the tag off the door, the little plate off the door of the radio broadcast booth, and I framed that. And I had everybody that worked that last game sign it, and I've got that framed in my office. And I even had Kevin Sumlin sign it and put the. We lost the game, but we put the score on there. I think I did that after Kevin signed it. But anyway, I've collected a lot of memorabilia that means a lot to me, and I don't know that it means anything to anybody else. But it's been a great life, and past is wonderful, and I'm looking forward to the future.
Well, Dave, thanks for the time today, but most importantly, thank you for 32 years of football and basketball on the air here in
I
Maguelab.
appreciate that very much. It's been a blessing.